The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Welcome once again to the GapFillers podcast, episode number 10. My name is Michael Bradford, and I would love to just thank all of my listeners who have been supportive and tuned in every week. This is one of the first major milestones of this podcast, and so I would like to just, for those of you who have reached out, thank you. That your kind words are very encouraging. I'm going to strive to do, my best, put forth my best analysis of national and state and local news. I hope that you can trust me, and I also am very grateful for everyone that has tuned in. With that, episode number 10, let's get started. The big thing in national news this week has been Donald Trump's quote unquote not State of the Union. I'm calling it a State of the Union because it has all the earmarks of it. It's pretty much, because it's the first year of the term, it's not considered of a non-consecutive term, rather. It's not considered a State of the Union address. However, that's the only thing the Constitution really tells the president to do to a joint session of Congress from time to time. So it doesn't really state that it has to be their second year in. So I am calling it a State of the Union. You can call it whatever you want, but for ease of terms and rhetoric, I'm calling it the State of the Union address. The big topic from that is Al Green was forced to be removed from Congress, or from the chambers during the speech because he kept on interrupting after being warned. This isn't the first time that somebody has been reprimanded for speaking out. Marjorie Taylor Greene during the Biden administration had caused a ruckus. However, she didn't have to be removed because when after the time came, she was quiet. Al Green stood up and claimed that Trump didn't have a mandate, waving, raising his cane up in the air, which I'm actually surprised that he's actually allowed to have. And there's been times in the past where canes have been, there was one pre-Civil War, one kind of incident that happened. It's called the Preston Brooks affair, where a representative from South Carolina, Preston Brooks, went up and basically beat a senator from Massachusetts, Sumner, to death, to an inch within his life. He never fully recovered, and this was Sumner was a staunch anti-slavery abolitionist, and Preston Brooks was a South Carolina a representative who Sumner had been attacking his brother. And as a thing of honor, he went up there and beat the crap out of him. For pardon my language on a little bit on that. So I'm here. Al Green is waving around a cane with a metal rod or metal end on it, and I not that I actually think he was not even close to doing anything. But it's just kind of something that brought up to mind. I was like, wow, he's actually allowed to have that in the chambers. So he was officially censored this week, which is basically the Congress's way of punishing, basically giving a verbal reprimand to a congressman. Really, what it does is it puts him on notice. He may be removed from pretty much every committee that he sits on. Other than that, there's not that much that they can do. They can try to impeach him, but there's no official law that's broken as long as he doesn't do it again or whatever. So there's no really big thing that censoring does, besides remove from committees, or the possible removing of committees, which would severely limit the amount of kind of say he has in a lot of major legislations. So a lot of because a lot of legislations go through committees in order to be brought before the entire House and or Senate. So before any law becomes or a bill becomes law or is voted on, a lot of it gets stuck in committee. That way they don't, in theory, waste people's time. But a lot of the committees do is waste people's time. That's why they're all lawyers. They sit up there and ask questions that they already know or can be easily researched by other things. But they get them on record, and they call witnesses and they exercise their power. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really do anything. A lot of people's minds are already made up. Same with the voting and interviewing these cabinet members. A lot of times, it's a delay tactic. For the most part, there's no, everybody's going to vote yay. That's already voting yay, and it gives those few people the time to grandstand. But at the end of the day, if there was 4 Republicans that were always kind of like, yeah, sure, I'm going to vote for them, and am I not going to vote for them? But anyways. So during the State of the Union, the other big piece of news is when Trump basically was using this as a political maneuvering tactic. There was he called the Democrats out by just out in front, basically saying there was nothing I can say or do that's going to make them stand and clap, and which made them not want to stand and clap. But in a kind of an expert maneuvering of the way the State of the Unions work, they call out, they invite guests and they call out from the balcony to highlight a few people. And there was one kid who was from Texas, I believe, and he had some form of cancer, but he always wanted to be a policeman. So they gave him an honorary induction into the Secret Service, kind of fulfilling, like a Make-A-Wish Foundation kind of thing, where he doesn't actually have anything, but it's just or informality or whatever. But this made none of the Democrats stood and clapped for that, which I don't personally care about that. It's all political maneuvering, but in the eyes of Congress, it makes it, or in the eyes of public, it can be used as a hey, look, they didn't even stand to clap for this kid who has cancer. And so it's an odd thing that it's the art of politics that's weird like that, because if it's fighting over people who think about stuff like that and care about stuff like that. Not that I don't. It's just the fact that it's all political maneuvering. I care much more about how his ranting about Doge and listing all the stuff about that the money that was saved through the Doge program so far. That's the kind of stuff that gets me. Okay, this is actual policy. They didn't stand for the girl who had she was partially paralyzed for a while because she was hit in the head during volleyball when a transvestite, claiming to be a girl, smacked her right in the head with a volleyball. So there's stuff like that that's just, it's political maneuvering at the end of the day. But it does highlight, that one does highlight the idiocracy that is the left. So, at the end, there is certain parts to it that highlight good policy that should be moved on. But like I said, to repeat one more time, political maneuvering. It's showmanship, and it's a rallying cry to get behind. So I don't want to forget this. So let me bring this up. There are 5 municipal elections in Orange County this week, this Tuesday, March 11th. However, there are also 56 total municipalities in Florida that are having elections. So if you are living in a municipality, you need to make sure that in Florida that you are going to be voting or not voting on Tuesday, March 11th. For those living in Orange County, to make it a shorter list, Coe, Winter Park, Belle Isle, Windermere, and Maitland, you are all voting on Tuesday. Some of it is mayors, some of it is city councilmen, but make your voice heard. Maitland is the only one that I was able to get a real beat on. Belle Isle had a private-esque debate between the mayors. It definitely looks like the incumbent's going to hold on to that one. But in Maitland, it's down to French and Fess. And I after doing research, Fess is a construction worker or a construction developer, and French is a UCF history professor. At the end of the day, they kind of focused on a lot of the same things. However, Fess is definitely giving me more of a good, more conservative vibe. I've reached out to both of them. Fess was the only one that responded. He didn't really give me my answer to my questions, but did at least give a little bit of lip service to my questions. I basically sent out a 3-question thing, but neither of them answered. Like I said, basically I wanted to know kind of their stance on what problems are they going to focus on, what values would they bring to local government. That's the kind of stuff that I it's vague enough to not be putting somebody in a corner, but at the same time it's you can kind of fish out where they stand on their overarching values and stuff like that. It's a weird thing that you kind of have to do, especially with nonpartisan races, because obviously if there's 2 people running against each other, they're more than likely a Republican and Democrat, just not with party or name backing. You can even do that sometimes with judges. I'm not going to bring up I'm not going to bring up the specifics, but there was a race in Florida last election where one person was saying, "Hey, I stand for everybody," as a inference that person doesn't. And basically you can kind of fish out where their social stances are, and by downstream kind of guess what their ideas of stuff are. That's even the way Supreme Court justices are brought up. You can't answer direct policy questions because the direct policy questions are the Constitution. However, it all comes down to your interpretation of the Constitution. And so you can determine whether it's a Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, a squishy Republican, because there's a couple of those on the Supreme Court still. Roberts, I'm talking to you. Anyways, so don't forget to on Tuesday if you are in a municipality to vote. The last thing I want to bring up today is DeSantis is looking to get. He had a state of the state kind of, calling out Canada and stuff like that. Basically, it's the governor version of the State of the Union address. He called out Canada for having a good hockey team, but or for Florida having a Stanley Cup hockey team, or that top. But he kind of viewed that it was a side thing. At Canadians are still coming to Florida to get away from their garbage of a country, especially their government. What Trump actually wants from Canada, I still don't get. I don't like their government, and I think the Conservative Party of Canada was definitely making grounds for the election within the next year. But because they're a parliamentary system, they can call a spot election every so often. I'm not sure. Each parliamentary system has their own weird quirks, but they need to. It's odd. It's a definite odd. But you got the Conservative Party in Canada, and then you have the Liberal Party in Florida, in Canada, and they're both kind of more liberal than than I keep on saying Florida, than the U.S. But at the end of the day, it's you still have conservative values versus liberal idiocracy. That Canada has a huge immigration problem. They're like the rest of Europe and frankly America was having, where we're importing the third world. And what happens when you import the third world is that you get third world qualities. This has come up throughout U.S. history. You have Irish gangs, Italian gangs, even Jewish gangs. You have the mob. You have different things throughout history where too many immigrants are brought in, and then instead of assimilating, it eventually becomes part of American culture. But that's why Boston is the way it is, and why New York, a lot of parts of New York are the way they are. The New York City was run by the mob, or it was run by a corrupt government for most of its history. With Boss Tweed, if you don't know who Boss Tweed is, he was basically a mayor of New York City for a while, and he was he was one of the most corrupt. He was like the quintessential corrupt politician there is, and he during the late 1800s, early 1900s, and with the railroads and all of that. But after that, you got rid of Boss Tweed, but he just shifted towards that kind of mentality. All just shifted to somebody else, to gangs that basically work outside government systems, because frankly government systems stink at their jobs. So it's a revolving door. Either the government's corrupt and squashes. Oftentimes it can be a corrupt government squashing gangs in order to basically be the gang, or you have a weak government, kind of like Mexico, subduing to the gangs. So everybody, all of the Western world right now is having this immigration problem, and it goes back to a little bit of the Cloward-Piven strategy. Basically, they want to import people who are going to vote for their social systems and be able to basically collapse the system into their utopian globalist look on life, and it doesn't. The English stop being for the English, or the people of the UK stop being for the people of the UK. Actual national. It's kind of like the getting away from the nationalist movements of the last 200 years and moving towards like, oh, we're all this country, people living within this country. And so over the last 200 years, with the decay of the empires and monarchs, you had the rise of ethnic nationalism of sorts, basically of these states popping up, basically like Czech, the people who live in or the Czech Republic are Czech. The whole reason why the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia was unstable is because they had two ethnicities that were always battling against each other. Yugoslavia was even worse. You had like 10. You had like 10 different nationalities battling within Yugoslavia. And so all these people are, at the end of the day, kind of, battling for okay, well, what do I have? What do you have? And they end up, really clashing with each other because one ends up getting left behind. This is happening in Rwanda, like I talked about last week. You got the DRC, the Rwandans in the DRC, and the Rwandan people of Rwanda, and you have different tribes within Rwanda, and then you have the different. So basically, they're all clashing with each other because people favor each other. They favor the tribes that look like them. In America, it's a little bit odd because we've had this kind of thing for 200 years, even though it wasn't always as obvious. It was even though it was mostly white people for the first 100 years, a lot of canceling forgetting about slavery for a second. You had the Irish, and you had the Italians, and you had other what people would classify as white people come in, but it was still a clash of ethnicities. And then it moved on to after the Civil War. In fact, pre-Civil War, that was the huge thing. It was basically that the South's big pushback against the North was, you have slaves, they're just you pay them slave wages. So what's the difference? Obviously there's a huge difference between that and chattel slavery, but so at the end of the day, there's the different ethnicities have always been kind of pushing back against each other, whereas now and throughout the world, or throughout the Western civilized world, you have a lot of basically globalist outlooks on society. It basically, because it's really because Europe is no longer the main power in the world, and you have these massive states like China, the U.S., and Russia, or even India and Indonesia. These countries with massive populations, and if you compare it to the population of one country within the EU, just take any country, it's not, there's no way that Poland could possibly beat, I don't know, Russia, just for direct correlation. There's no way that Poland can beat Russia. There's no way that just Germany can beat Russia. It would be a closer match, but at the end of the day, at the end of the day, there's a lot bigger population of Russia. And so it's no longer the country of, it's no longer the geopolitic of the early 1900s. It's now, the modern century where a ton of people have nukes, and that's basically what's happening. And so, the U.S. is looking at withdrawing, or at least, backing off of a lot of NATO partnerships, and that's forcing Europe to scramble. And the problem is that Europe is still, their GDP and their idea of growth is obnoxious. Spain is looking at having a 3 to 4 day work week, whereas and so depending on our protection, they're able to enact their socialist policies under the guise of NATO defense. So we have been protecting them for a while now. Anyways, I've talked about that recently, so I will end up repeating stuff, but what I really don't want to do is repeat the same thing every week. So at the end of the day, we've been subsidizing NATO and with globalist policies. But anyways, back to the topic, DeSantis. And so the big thing I want to talk about with DeSantis, though, is he has a kind of a good framework of an idea. He wants to phase out or get rid of the property tax. I think property taxes are actually one of the most unreasonable tax there is, because if you have to pay property tax, that means you never actually own your property. You're always paying the government, basically leasing it from the government, and that's the point he made. So on the nose, that is the best framing of the idea that you can get. However, two things. There's two major hiccups to this. especially with the desirability of Florida. One, people really want to own land in Florida, but they don't want to live in Florida year round. Uh, People in New York, because of the difference of CPI and cost of living, people can afford to buy stuff rich people in New York can afford to buy stuff at and mark up our price, outbid Floridians for Florida land and property. This is because their GDP or their CPI rather is much higher. So basically, their wages are a lot more. Now their cost of living is more up there, but if they're able to save an excess, say you have $150,000, and you make $150,000, and you're able to put away 2% of that, or 10%. Let's for round numbers. Let's say 10%. Okay, so that's 10% is $15,000 of 150,000, right? But say the average Floridian makes $50,000, right? 10% of $50,000 is $5,000. So at the end of the day, even if they're spending more of their income, or if they're paying more income but the same percentage on housing, they can then buy somewhere else, say like Florida, and outcompete with the $15,000 to $5,000 range. So they can, if those numbers lined up, you would be able to outbid somebody by $10,000 a year for goods or services, or in this case, property. And so, in order for this the easiest thing what would happen is that people would just sit on the land. Other places, companies or businessmen or investors would sit on land and kind of hoard the land away from the average Floridian and outcompete them because their CPI is higher. It's because they already have more capital there. And so this is the problem that a lot of small towns run into with a big corporate mill or something like that. When big companies move into small towns, they have a lot of capital outflow, and the big corporation, whatever mill it may be or whatever factory it may be that the small town functions on, at the end of the day, they can be outbid by any other competitor. So if they want to create another thing in the town, the big corporation, or you have a lot of capital outflow because the reinvestment is minimal within that town once the factory is actually built. You got the wages, but everybody buys and all the capital goes out of the town again. And so especially if it's not something that that's why you need a multifaceted town, with multiple income forms of income. The problem is that once you start doing that, you stop being a small town, and you could become your own victim of thriving. Is because more people move into the town. That means some people, if they bring in capital, they outbid the locals, and the process starts all over again. People move out because they don't want to compete. They don't want to live in a big town. But the problem, if you don't want to live in a big town, you have small town problems like, a very volatile-esque economy. It's all or nothing a lot of times. Because name certain industry, and there's a lot of factories in small towns. If you go to a small town, you can almost find a single massive factory. It's usually a corporation, massive conglomeration of a corporation of some kind, and if that corporation closes that particular thing, the town ends up dying, and that's what's happened a lot to the thousands of small towns around America throughout history. Is you have ebbs and flows of the economy, and that's why bringing back manufacturing to America is so important. However, the way that they want to set up their factories is kind of they want it not as dispersed anymore. So they want a huge localized factory, especially in like car parts or something like that. And so what that ends up doing is that they bring a lot of the stuff to the big towns or to an area, that requires thousands, if not tens of thousands, of people to support it. So all these manufacturing jobs are possibly going to be coming to big towns. Anyways, back to the thing I was talking about with the no property tax. So that's the big problem is right off the nose is other people hoarding land, non-Floridian non-residents hoarding land. The second big hassle would be, this is from the opposite side of the aisle, really, is what happens with government revenue. Florida doesn't really have a property tax, but all the lower counties do. So what this ends up doing is, the idea is that it's a good thought, but what are they going to replace it with? The libertarians would say nothing, but okay, if you have to have something, how about a sales tax? The problem is that a lot of these small counties or cities or municipalities, like I said before, they don't have a lot of jobs. So a lot of people commute for other jobs. And so if the jobs are in, say the job is in Daytona, right? Daytona Beach, all right? But they live in, some rural close town of that. Maybe they live outside of Volusia County even. But they can commute to Daytona every day in order to, get that job. Okay, so if they're spending all their money there, but living in a different county, how is that county or municipality going to supplement their government revenues? They can do that by cutting off spending. But that doesn't really work at the end of the day it does, but at the end of the day, the government does have basic functions it needs to do. And so you will end up with a very, polarized government as, the big cities will get bigger or, maybe bring in more revenue in other ways. So the idea is is a very tricky one. And I'm not sure what the pure answer is. I would definitely favor full-time residents. Maybe it's like 10 out of the 12 months, because people go traveling or whatever. But if you live in Florida over 10 months out of the year, you can be considered a full resident and therefore get no property tax. That would be a good. Maybe you do it per diem. Or something, I don't know, because you can't really track where somebody lives on a daily basis. So maybe they have to, I don't know, bring in an income in Florida, because I'm not exactly sure how that would look. I can't believe I'm making a case against getting rid of property taxes altogether, but the idea is you need to replace it with something else. A revenue of some kind. It doesn't even have to be a taxation. It could be a toll or a usage fee or something. There's other ways of funding government. I've gone over that before. But you still need, at the end of the day, to have people from outside the state not hoarding land inside the state, or even people inside the state. Maybe you put like a cap of 10 acres on it or something. I'm not sure what it would look like, but the idea of getting rid of property taxes on the whole is still a bad idea if people in other states are going to have the same benefit while not actually living in the state. So I would like to thank you all once again for joining me for episode number 10. Give you all a round of applause. I really appreciate it. For you all who have stuck around, been very supportive. Like I said, I would be very grateful if we can grow the podcast. I am open to ideas. If anybody wants to give me a shout out, even give me a private message on Facebook or X, that I'd be really grateful, and we can figure out how to get the word out and preserve local politics because I really view local politics, especially if you can decentralize government to the most possible. That's the way to get it to personal responsibility at the end of the day. So once again, thank you, and have a good week.